We no longer require your translation services. You're dismissed. Those were his exact words, clear, loud, with a smile so tight it could slice through steel, and he said them right in the middle of the Q2 stakeholders meeting. Imagine it, 23 people in one room, executives, department heads, long-term partners, even our guests from Japan and Germany. The walls were glass, the lighting white and clinical, and the espresso machines outside the conference room still hissing between silences. I was standing by the corner screen, just one step away from presenting the updated negotiation map I had spent the past month preparing, every zone shaded, every clause updated, every term triple-checked in 3 languages. But before I could begin, the new CEO, Mr. Chadwick Langston, cleared his throat from the head of the table and looked straight at me, not through me, at me, like I was a hiccup interrupting his monologue. He didn't even blink when he said it. We no longer require your translation services. You're dismissed. Translation services. That's what he thought I did. As if I was just a walking Google Translate with a blazer and a badge. There was a pause, half a beat too long. I remember it because the air conditioning clicked on overhead. And suddenly, it felt 10 degrees colder. No one said a word. Not Greg from legal, who I used to have lunch with twice a week. Not Annika, who'd sat beside me for 9 years and once cried in my car after a terrible quarterly review. Not even Sophia, the VP of International Affairs, who once told me I was the reason our East Asia partnerships were still alive. All of them silent. Some avoided my gaze. Others looked down. One man actually tried to smile sympathetically, but it twisted into something awkward. Like he didn't want to be seen siding with someone on the way out. I could feel the blood drain from my face. My fingers went cold, my feet heavy. The floor wasn't moving, but it felt like it was sinking. I had flown to Tokyo 3 times last quarter, mediated tense calls at 3 Abao M with German partners who were ready to pull out over Clause 17b. I had rewritten entire supply agreements while fighting bronchitis, just to keep the Seoul office from filing notice. And now, I was being dismissed, not for misconduct, not for underperformance, but because the man in charge who'd only been here for 6 weeks didn't understand what I did, didn't bother to ask, didn't care to learn. He called it translation services. I don't know what hurt more, that he said it, or that no one stopped him, no one even flinched. I heard a chair squeak behind me, and someone, the intern, maybe shuffled a notepad like they were trying to disappear into it. My mouth went dry. I tried to speak, to say anything, but my throat closed around the words like a fist. And then I nodded. That's all. Not because I agreed, not because I accepted it, but because I knew right then that this man had no idea what was coming. I walked over to the side table to gather my laptop. My hand brushed a folder I hadn't meant to bring. Something I had been quietly compiling over the last fiscal year just in case. My fingers paused on the tab, and then I felt it. That shift inside me. Not rage, not sadness. Something quieter, sharper, like the sound of a blade unsheathing in a silent room. He thought I was just a translator. He had no idea what I actually held in my hands. They didn't always see me as invisible. There was a time years ago when I was the person everyone came to when something felt like it might fall apart. You see, I wasn't hired just to translate. I was brought in during the fragile post-merger phase when our American firm tried to expand into Japan and Germany without crashing into a wall of misunderstanding, and they were crashing fast. The documents were technically accurate but soulless. The meetings were tense, full of misreads and cultural stumbles. We nearly lost our Osaka partner over a phrase that, to the untrained ear, sounded harmless, but in context, implied deep disrespect. I was the one who caught that. And it wasn't just the language I understood: nuance, intent, rhythm. I'd spent 7 years living between Munich and Kyoto. I didn't just speak, I heard. So, I rewrote entire contracts line by line, sat in on every call, built bridges where silence had burned them. The then CEO, Robert Lansing, once introduced me as the glue holding 3 continents together. He wasn't the type to throw around praise, but he meant it. And for a while, I believed him. I was in every key meeting. Clients would send emails asking for me by name. Even our German partner, notoriously formal, once joked over dinner, "If she ever quits, we quit." So, no, I wasn't invisible. Not then. But it changed. Quietly, slowly. It started with Robert's retirement. That was the beginning of the shift. The board brought in Chadwick Langston, a man who wore ambition like cologne, strong, expensive, and choking. At first, he smiled too wide, told stories with no substance, kept calling our partners international friends like they were mascots. I saw the tension in our foreign teams, but I kept doing my job. Only, I wasn't invited to the weekly global alignment meetings anymore. Then I stopped getting forwarded the working drafts of upcoming contracts. I brushed it off at first, told myself maybe they were just restructuring, streamlining communication, but I could feel the edges closing in. One day, Sophia, our VP of International, stopped replying to my contract feedback altogether. When I asked if something was wrong, she smiled and said, "Don't worry. Chadwick wants a more modern tone now. Shorter, sharper, more American assertiveness." She said it like it was a compliment. The next week, I found my name missing from the invite list for the Q1 negotiation prep. I asked Greg in legal. He said maybe it was an accident, but it wasn't. I was still doing the work, reviewing translations, annotating presentations, guiding subtle word choices. I just wasn't allowed in the room anymore, and yet, my notes kept appearing verbatim in the slide decks, but attributed to strategic communications. That wasn't a department. It was Chadwick. He'd made me a ghost. I remember one day, a partner from Hamburg called and asked for me directly. He was furious, said the new tone felt like being barked at. I apologized, tried to salvage the relationship. Later, when I told Chadwick what happened, he laughed. "They'll adjust. We can't keep bending to their feelings forever." He said feelings like it was a dirty word. That same afternoon, I found out through Sophia that he was considering bringing in an external global relations consultant, a 28-year-old from one of his old startups who spoke only English and once attended a conference in Barcelona. Meanwhile, I had 20 years of field experience and a Rolodex of saved deals, but I said nothing. I just kept collecting. I started quietly forwarding key emails to a secure backup, not leaking, just keeping records. I saved all the translation iterations, logged contract changes, noted cultural missteps that led to friction, tracked client feedback that was ignored. I even started recording my weekly reviews subtly, just voice notes, just in case I needed to remember exactly how many times Chadwick called our Japanese partner the sushi guy. Maybe I knew, somewhere deep down, I was already preparing for a storm. One morning, I showed up early to finalize a report only to find my access to the international servers revoked. IT said it was a transition phase, but they couldn't explain who approved the change. A week later, a printed deck was left on my desk for review. No email, no instructions. At the top corner, for language polishing only. I stared at it for a full minute. Language, polishing, like I was just the spell check button with a heartbeat. Still, I did it, carefully, accurately. And then I printed a second version, with all the mistakes marked in red, all the missing cultural context flagged, and a single note at the bottom. If you use this version without these changes, you're gambling with a $3 4M renewal. I slipped it under Sophia's door. She never acknowledged it. But I kept the time-stamped copy for myself. Around this time, a quiet intern named Tyler started staying late. He'd ask shy questions why a word was phrased a certain way, what a phrase meant in Korean business etiquette. I answered them, never complained, just explained. One night, he looked at me and said, "They don't know how much they're depending on you." I smiled. They will. And that was the seed. The moment I realized I wasn't just enduring, I was documenting, not for revenge, for clarity, because sooner or later, someone would ask what happened. And I wanted to be ready to answer with facts, not feelings. It wasn't the firing that broke me. It was the silence that came right after. Not one voice in that room spoke up. Not even a cough or the scraping of a chair leg. Just that heavy pause where everyone pretended not to see what had just happened, like I'd never been there to begin with. I walked out with my spine stiff, my breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. I didn't even remember riding the elevator down, just that my reflection in the stainless steel doors looked smaller. When I got to my office, my name still on the glass, I sat down, locked the door, and just stared at the ceiling. And then I cried. I don't mean a graceful tear trailing down the cheek like in those sappy movies. I mean my whole body shook. Ugly. Silent sobs. The kind that sneak up on you after years of pushing everything down. The kind that taste like betrayal. Not sadness. Because the truth was, I knew it was coming. Still, knowing doesn't always protect you. What hurt wasn't just that Chadwick had fired me. It was how publicly, condescendingly, and with such confidence, like I was the idiot in the room, like I didn't matter. And that final phrase, translation services, like he was letting go of a contractor, not a human being who'd given 2 decades of her life to making sure we didn't lose face or funding overseas. I wanted to disappear. I really did. I even pulled up a draft resignation letter I'd written months ago, one of those late-night, wine-fueled sessions where you imagine quitting with dignity before someone takes it from you. But I didn't click send, because right as I was about to, my phone buzzed. A message from Hiroshi Tanaka, the Tokyo partner. Just 3 words. Where are you? That's all it took. I stared at that question for 5 minutes. Because that simple line told me what Chadwick didn't know, what the room didn't realize. They still thought I mattered. To our clients, I wasn't invisible. So no, I didn't quit that night. I didn't fold the letter or empty my drawer. I stayed. And I planned. Quietly. You see, Chadwick thought he was being clever, that he'd erased me before I could make noise, but all he'd done was speed up the part I'd been preparing for all along. That folder I touched, the one I accidentally brought into the boardroom. It wasn't an accident. Inside it were transcripts, email trails, cultural missteps, proof of deals salvaged, clients soothed, chaos prevented, and records of how many of those fires had started after my recommendations had been ignored. But I didn't send them. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next few days playing the ghost they wanted. I didn't argue. I didn't demand an exit interview. I just faded into the background. But I kept collecting. When it sent a final reminder to return my credentials, I asked for 48 hours to gather my materials for transfer. They agreed without a second thought. In those 48 hours, I pulled the full audit I'd been building for over a year. A language gap analysis, market loss projection, and a 3-page memo summarizing the cultural violations already costing us trust and likely money. I labeled it Pending Impact Summary. Then I slid it into an envelope. No note. No signature, just one word handwritten in pen on the tab review. I left it with my friend in legal, Hannah. We weren't close, but she was fair, quiet, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who read everything. Even the small print at the bottom. I didn't ask her to do anything with it, just left it on her desk. And then I waited. A week passed. Then another. I kept my phone silent, ignored the gossip. But one morning, around 6:12 a.m., I got an alert. Tyler, the intern, had sent me a message. Heads up. They're doing a rebrief of the APAC strategy today. No one's translating. And Mr. Tanaka asked where you were. Loudly, I smiled. Not out of spite. Just quietly. The way you do when you know something's about to tip. And I got dressed. Not in a power suit. Nothing flashy. Just a simple navy blazer. Low heels. And a folder under my arm. I didn't need an invite to that meeting. I wasn't trying to crash it. I just walked in 5 minutes before it started and sat quietly in the back. People noticed, but no one stopped me. The screen was already up. Chadwick was talking too fast again. And someone, Sophia, was flipping between slides in a panic. I noticed the German title had a typo. The Japanese one didn't translate at all. Hiroshi was on Zoom, his face stone cold. Chadwick tried to joke, something about lost in translation. No one laughed. And that's when Tyler stood up. Everyone turned. You could feel the room lean toward him, and he said, voice steady, Sir, this isn't working. We're offending clients. And we lost the Berlin account last week because they said we were dismissive of cultural terms. That's their quote. You keep asking us to modernize the tone, but we're not even being understood. Silence. I didn't speak. I didn't have to, because that was the cue. I walked up, set the folder down at the center of the conference table, didn't open it, didn't explain. Just tapped it once and said, "If you want to know why you're bleeding overseas, it's in there." Then I turned, walked toward the door, and just before I stepped out, I heard someone whisper, "Wait, is that her? The one they thought they could erase?" It happened 3 weeks after I walked out of that meeting. 3 weeks of silence, where no one officially acknowledged my folder. No phone call, no HR meeting, no apology, just corporate static. But I knew better than to wait for a confession. Corporate silence isn't neutral, it's a strategy. So I didn't chase it. I didn't send a follow-up email or call to ask, "Did you get a chance to read what I left?" I let it simmer. Because I also knew something else. Our annual Global Partnership Summit was coming. The biggest event of the year, hosted right here at HQ, full press coverage, live-streamed speeches, a live translator booth, and our most critical partners flying in from Germany, Japan, and Seoul, and Chadwick. He was headlining it. He even called it the New Vision Bold Moves for a Modern Market. That morning, I dressed the same way I had for years, simple, quiet elegance, navy wrap dress, hair pinned back, low heels, except this time, I wore a pin, a silver one shaped like an open eye, a gift from our Japanese partners the year we salvaged their collapsing deal. It wasn't for decoration, it was for memory. The event was held in the West Conference Hall, a sweeping room lined with white marble and brushed steel. Designed to intimidate, glass podium, massive screen, rows of chairs filled with executives, media, guests. And on that stage, at 10:04 a.m. Exactly. Chadwick began his keynote speech. He opened strong, smooth, confident. Today marks a new era in global efficiency, one not built on tradition, but bold reinvention. There was applause, manufactured, polite, the kind that stops when the hands do, not when the heart says it's enough. I stood near the side door, out of frame but not out of reach, and from where I stood, I saw Hiroshi Tanaka shift in his seat, cross his arms. The slide deck began to flicker on screen. Phrases in English, and then poorly translated German, flat Japanese. Errors I'd flagged a dozen times before. Errors that had cost us one client already. No one said a word. Not yet. Until the voice came. From the back row. It was Tyler, the intern. He wasn't supposed to speak. He wasn't even supposed to be in the main hall. But he stood up, not shyly this time. He held up a paper. "I just want to clarify, was this the approved version of the presentation?" he asked, loud enough that his voice echoed. Chadwick blinked. "Excuse me," Tyler repeated, firmer, "because this version contains at least 5 cultural inaccuracies and 3 terms considered offensive by our Japanese and Korean partners." "I know, because I checked with them last night." A pause. The room shifted. Chadwick tried to recover. "Thank you for your passion. But this material was reviewed by our communications team." Tyler didn't sit. Instead, he turned slowly to face the VIP row, Hiroshi-san. He said in fluent Japanese, "Is this how you expected to be addressed today?" And just like that, the room held its breath. Hiroshi stood, straightened his blazer, then spoke quietly, but into his lapel mic, so the whole room could hear it. "I requested she be present today. The woman who helped us draft the partnership clause 5 years ago. The one who understood our values. Where is she?" Gasps. Actual gasps. Chadwick tried to wave it off. "I'm not sure who you're referring to, but that was when I stepped forward. Not dramatically, not quickly, just enough. I walked onto the stage, calm, centered, every eye turned. I reached the podium, opened a folder, and pulled out 2 sheets. One was the official version of the partnership speech in proper, respectful language. The second was the version Chadwick had just used. I handed them to the translator. She scanned them. Her eyes widened. Then she nodded and said, "Only one of these respects protocol. It's not the one we just heard." The room exploded. Whispers surged like a rising tide. And then, softly, I spoke. I was let go 3 weeks ago for being just a translator. But I wasn't translating words. I was translating intent, cultural nuance, long-term trust. I held up a flash drive. This contains 12 examples of missteps that cost us $3 million in strained relationships over the last 2 quarters. All of them happened after I was removed from the process. I turned to the front row, where board members sat frozen. You were told those losses were due to market shifts. They weren't. A murmur. Then one of the board members, Ms. Delaney, held out her hand. I walked it to her. "Is that true?" she asked Chadwick, who was now visibly sweating. Chadwick laughed nervously. "I mean, this is all a bit theatrical. Don't you think we're here to celebrate progress?" But another voice cut in, from Greg, the lawyer. "Actually," he said, standing slowly, "if even half of this is accurate, we're looking at gross negligence." Panic began to flicker across Chadwick's face. He looked at me, wild-eyed. "You set this up." "No," I said. "Evenly, you did." When you mistook experience for decoration, then Sophia, who had sat silent all this time, leaned forward and said, without looking at him, "She warned us. I have the emails. That was the final blow." Chadwick opened his mouth, but no words came out. Just silence. Thick, cold, unforgiving, one by one. People stood up, not to leave, to look at me, and then away from him. He tried to recover. "Can we talk about this privately?" But Ms. Delaney stood, looked at security. "Please escort Mr. Langston out, immediately." And just like that, it was done. No applause, no music, just the sound of one man walking out of a room that no longer pretended to follow him. I stood there, not triumphant, just still, and as the door closed behind him, Hiroshi gave a small bow in my direction. "Now we can begin," he said, and this time, the room did applaud, not for a presentation, for the truth. The room didn't just go quiet after Chadwick was escorted out. It was stunned, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, unsure what to do now that the loudest voice had been silenced. No one reached for their coffee. No one shuffled papers. People sat still, blinking, readjusting their posture like they'd just realized they were on the wrong side of something much bigger than they'd imagined. And yet, no one looked at me with pity, not anymore. They looked with something else. Respect, maybe, or discomfort. The kind that comes when you realize someone you ignored for too long just pulled the floor out from under the entire room and did it without raising her voice. I didn't stay long. I walked out through the side door, the same one I'd slipped in through weeks earlier, except this time, people parted to let me pass, and behind me, I heard murmurs, my name, my full name, not as gossip, as reference, as authority. By that afternoon, word had reached the media soft at first, just whispers about an executive shakeup and a quiet disruption at the global summit, but the partners had seen it live, and they didn't hold back. By the end of the week, 3 major clients had requested formal statements on whether Chadwick's tenure had violated any agreed-upon cultural clauses. One even attached a list of phrases that had been used in public communication phrases I had flagged and been ignored for. 2 international newspapers ran quiet features, not splashy ones, just long, steady pieces titled things like "When Expertise is Silenced" and "The Woman Who Understood the Room." Inside the company, it was chaos. The Internal Review Board launched a quiet investigation, not just about Chadwick, but how someone with no intercultural experience had been allowed to override long-established systems. Sophia was pulled into multiple meetings. Greg, who had once barely nodded in my direction, reached out for a timeline of decisions leading up to my termination. I didn't send him bullet points. I sent him the full archive I had quietly compiled, not in anger, in clarity, and I included a single line in the email. I didn't speak up because I was angry. I spoke up because we were losing the very thing we spent decades building: trust. He replied 10 minutes later, "This is devastating and necessary. Thank you." Within 2 weeks, the company issued a formal internal memo acknowledging a lapse in oversight during a period of transition. It didn't mention names, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew. Chadwick was officially removed from all duties and later cited as no longer affiliated. His LinkedIn changed overnight. He tried to save face, releasing a vague post about strategic differences and a desire to explore personal ventures. No one liked it. No one commented. He disappeared. And in his absence, the board asked me to return. Not just return. They asked me to rebuild what had been broken. They wanted a new position, one that hadn't existed before: Chief Cultural Liaison, reporting directly to the board. They offered back pay, relocation allowance, a new team. I read the offer carefully, every word, and then I closed the document and didn't respond for a week. Because I needed time to ask myself the one question no one else had bothered to ask me in months. Did I want to go back? The answer surprised me. It wasn't an immediate yes. It wasn't even a triumphant no. It was calm. I realized I didn't need to go back to prove anything, but I also didn't need to walk away just to make a point. So I wrote them back, and I said I'd return, under conditions. One, I'd report to the board, not to a rotating C-suite, ever again. 2, I would build my own team, people from different languages, cultures, and ages, not just diverse on paper, but truly representative of the people we claimed to serve. And 3, I wouldn't chase clients anymore. If they wanted us, they had to sit at our table as equals. No more cutting corners on cultural respect for the sake of speed. The board said yes, every condition, and that's how I walked back into the same building I was once fired from, this time through the front entrance. Security knew my name. My old office was gone, so they gave me a corner one, with windows. My first meeting back. I saw faces shift when I entered, some embarrassed, some hopeful. A few, Sophia included, looked like they wanted to say something but didn't. And that was fine, because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just a shift in how people stand when you walk into a room. It's in the way they pause before speaking over you. The way they forward you the final draft first, not as a courtesy, but out of recognition. I didn't need an apology from everyone, but the one I got quiet, over coffee, from Tyler meant more than I expected. I knew you were important, but I didn't know how much we needed you until you were gone. I smiled. That's the part they always forget, until it's too late. Some mornings are louder than others, and some, like this one, are so quiet it feels like the world finally stopped spinning just long enough for you to breathe. I sat on the back porch with my second cup of coffee. No meetings, no alarms, just the rhythm of a sprinkler clicking 2 houses over, and the steady hum of spring insects claiming their space again. And for the first time in years, I wasn't rehearsing a pitch in my head. I wasn't reviewing timelines, thinking through which executive to copy, or wondering what part of my voice I needed to adjust to be heard in a room full of louder men. I was just here, not as someone's former title, not as a cautionary tale, just a woman with a weathered mug, watching the light shift through an old oak, and it hit me how long it had taken to come back to stillness. Because losing your job doesn't just end a paycheck, it interrupts your rhythm. It shakes your sense of identity, even when you know it wasn't your fault, even when you win, even when the truth comes out and they say, "You were right all along." The journey back to yourself is the part no one claps for, but it's where the real story happens. A few weeks after I started my new position, I was guest lecturing at a leadership seminar, just a small room, maybe 20 young professionals seated in a circle, eager to ask all the questions I used to be afraid to voice. One woman, mid-30s, stayed behind after class. She looked exhausted, Not in a careless way, in a used-up way. She asked me, gently, "Do you ever regret staying silent for so long?" And I paused, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted to tell the truth. "No," I said. "I regret thinking silence meant weakness." She blinked at that, and I smiled. I wasn't quiet because I didn't know what to say. I was quiet because I was watching. And when I finally spoke, it mattered. Sometimes the world doesn't need more noise. It needs precision. It needs patience. It needs people who move when the ground is ready to shift. That same evening, my niece came over for dinner. She's 10. Sharp as glass and soft as a cloud. At one point she asked, totally unprompted, "Why do people think women can't lead?" I nearly dropped my fork. And then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the way she asked it, with that certainty, it made me hopeful. People used to think that. I said, "Some still do, but you won't have to prove yourself the way we did." She looked at me with this kind of awe that pierced right through, and said, "Because you already did that moment. That was the reward. Not a corner office, not a line in a newspaper, but knowing that someone watched you walk through fire, and came away believing they could walk through theirs too. So, if you're listening to this right now, if you've ever been told you're too quiet, too difficult, too expensive, too outdated, or simply not the right fit, if you've ever been the one holding everything together, only to be left out when it counted most, I want you to hear me. You are not invisible. You are not broken. You are not what they whispered in boardrooms or scribbled in margins or excluded from email threads. You are what you survived, and more than that, you're what you decide to build from the pieces. It might take time. It might take silence. It might take walking away before you ever get the apology. But your voice still matters. Your story still counts. You're still here, and that matters more than anything. And if you've made it this far with me, thank you. If any piece of this story reminded you of your past, your pain, your perseverance, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Because someone out there might be waiting for a story like yours to feel brave enough to begin theirs. And if you know someone, just one person who's been made to feel small lately, maybe send this to them. Let them know quiet doesn't mean powerless. It never did. And hey, if stories like this speak to your soul, stick around. We tell the ones people don't usually say out loud, but always needed to hear.